You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 20th of May 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up, Iran's president is killed in a helicopter crash.
When Iran was gripped by protests after the presidential election of 2009, Raisi was instrumental in the subsequent crackdown.
We'll have the latest on the death of Ibrahim Raisi. Also coming up,
now President Lai Ching-te and Vice President Xiaobi King will accompany former President Taiwan to the main stage.
From a Taiwanese mining village to the height of power, we profile Lai Ching-te as he's inaugurated in Taipei. Plus, we ask why North Macedonia's new president won't say the name of her country, making the Greeks angry. Plus, remember Ace of Base?
It's easier now when you have a few years afterwards and have a little more perspective on the career than when we were actually inside this crazy circus, because it was just totally crazy, mayhem all the time.
We hear about a new no-holds-barred documentary on the group. And we go through the papers and dip into the world of sauna diplomacy. That's all ahead on The Globalist, live from London. We deal first today with some breaking news. In the last hour and a half, it's been announced that the president of Iran, Ibrahim Raisi, has been killed in a helicopter crash. State media in Iran announced his death. Also on board was the country's foreign minister, Hossein Amir Abdollahian. The convoy was flying through a mountainous area in thick fog, travelling back from the inauguration of a dam on the border of Iran and Azerbaijan. Well, since coming to power in 2021, Ibrahim Raisi presided over a bloody crackdown on protest and a clampdown on personal expression. He had become, however, a contender to be Iran's next supreme leader, loyal to the supreme leader Ali Khamenei, Raisi's 85-year-old mentor. Well, let's hear now from Andrew Muller, looking back on the life of Ibrahim Raisi.
The President of Iran is a powerful man, the head of government of a mighty nation of 90 million people. However, the President of Iran is not Iran's most powerful man. That status is enjoyed by the supreme leader, of which there have been just two since the Islamic Revolution of 1979. Ayatollahs Khomeini and Khamenei, whose miserably stringent outlooks differed about as much as their names. Of the 8 presidents who have served them and their unforgiving vision, Ibrahim Raisi was probably the one with whom either figure had the least difficulty. Ibrahim Raisi was born on December 14, 1960, in Mashhad. God was the Raisi family trade. His father, who died when Ibrahim was a child, was a cleric, and young Ibrahim had an accordingly religious education. At 15, he began attending seminary in Qom, the heart of Iran's clerical establishment, and shortly after Raisi's 18th birthday, the heart of Iran's establishment full stop, as the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, another Qom alumnus, returned to complete Iran's Islamic Revolution. Raisi's early career was spent applying the laws of man rather than the word of God, but for a young prosecutor in the fervid early years of the Islamic Republic, there was often a significant overlap. There were fifth columnists to be suspected, counter-revolutionaries to be imprisoned, dissidents to be purged, and especially once Iran's brutal war with neighbouring Iraq got properly underway during the 1980s, political prisoners by the thousand to be executed. Raisi was appointed by Khomeini to a committee which made determinations upon the loyalty of prisoners to the revolution. Mercy at this point was in short supply. The many to whom it was not extended were hanged from cranes and shovelled into mass graves. Raisi's rise through the judiciary continued after Khomeini was succeeded by the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Raisi was successively the prosecutor for Tehran, head of the General Inspection Organization, and Prosecutor General of the Special Court for the Clergy, and first deputy to the Chief Justice, roles which permitted Raisi an insider's insight into where the levers of power were and where the allegorical and literal bodies were buried. When Iran was gripped by protests after the presidential election of 2009, Raisi was instrumental in the subsequent crackdown. Confirmation of Raisi's status as a firm regime favourite came in 2016 when Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei appointed him custodian of the Imam Riza shrine in Mashhad, a nominally clerical role that effectively gave Raisi stewardship of billions of dollars worth of assets. When Raisi declared himself a candidate for the presidential election of 2017, it looked like the final plank of a platform he had been assiduously building for decades. Raisi lost, and by a considerable margin, to the incumbent Hassan Rouhani. He returned to the bench and was, by 2019, Iran's Chief Justice, a position which allowed him, with an eye on the 2021 presidential election, to pursue popular crusades against corrupt government officials and bent business people, some of whom may have been guilty. With Rouhani term limited and with the further assistance of allies on Iran's Guardian Council, who helpfully disqualified several potentially popular candidates, Raisi won big in 2021, a triumph tarnished somewhat by the lowest turnout in Iran's history and by a hefty return of votes left blank or defaced in protest. Raisi's first months as president were a demonstration of a universal rule of politics, that you dance with who brung you, even if a man of Raisi's abstemious piety might not appreciate that particular metaphor. He directed funding towards defence at the expense of ameliorating the economic struggles of ordinary Iranians, and showed little interest in a renewed nuclear deal which might have lifted American sanctions. He encouraged Iran's morality police, which is to say grown men paid by the state to pester women about how they are wearing their scarves, to pursue rigorously and vigorously transgressions against the compulsory hijab. This had seismic consequences in 2022 when a young woman called Mahsa Amini died in the custody of one such goon squad. Huge protests across Iran were answered with state violence. Hundreds died. Raisi was a hardliner abroad as well as at home, demonstrated most obviously in April 2024 when Iran launched a barrage of hundreds of drones and missiles at Israel, following Israel's bombing of Iran's embassy compound in Damascus. Though the two countries had waged a shadow war for years, with Iranian proxies in Syria a regular target of Israeli airstrikes, the abandonment of pretense was significant, even if almost everything Iran flung at Israel was shot down by Israel and/or its allies. Raisi, for all that he was president, was never the real power, though it was suspected in some quarters that this awaited him, that the elderly Khamenei had long been sizing Raisi up as a successor. Raisi's passing in such circumstances, along with that of Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian, will inevitably occasion excitement among those who believe that a helicopter cannot simply crash in heavy fog. It would not be out of character for the regime Raisi served, dependent as it always has been on a paranoid narrative of persecution, to help such speculation along. For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Muller.
Andrew Muller there. Well, I'm joined in the studio now by Yossi Meckelberg, Associate Fellow with the Middle East and North Africa Programme at Chatham House. A very good morning to you, Yossi.
Morning.
Thank you very much indeed for coming in. As Andrew just mentioned there, this narrative of persecution, what do we know about the circumstances of the crash yesterday?
Well, the President, together with the Foreign Minister, travelled from the area of Azerbaijan, visiting there. And it seems that weather conditions were quite harsh. We know that the aviation record in Iran when it comes to helicopters and other not great. And there have been such incidents in the past that claimed the life of senior Iranian officials. And it's probably due to malfunction, maybe pilot mistakes, bad weather, led probably the crash. But yeah.
The reactions that have been coming through in the last couple of hours have one word which is stitched through the portrait of Raisi, which is hardliner. I mean, Andrew Muller mentioned hardliner both at home and abroad. And this was a man who, from day one, took a very stern view of affairs.
Yeah. If you look, he was born in 1960, so the revolution. He was a young man, very much involved in kind of the protest, and as kind of more junior member of those who brought the revolution into fruition. But at the same time, he went through the ranks and made his name, for better or for worse, more for worse, during the Iran-Iraq war and its aftermath, and made his way up the ranks because he was a hardliner, because he was ruthless and still remained ruthless throughout his life. And this was... Now, if you look at the kind of, when it comes to presidency in Iran, you have almost a cycle of one more moderate, more pragmatic, one more hardliner between the Khatami and the Rouhani, of the more pragmatic, and then you have Ahmadinejad and people like Ibrahim Raisi. So we have kind of, and in my mind, this is a way of the supreme leaders and the Revolutionary Guard almost to control the presidency by making sure that this institution within Iran is not getting too much power.
Because, I mean, let's be absolutely clear about this. The individual in charge is the supreme leader, Ayatollah al-Khamenei. And the reaction to Raisi's death has been, it's the end of his time, but actually the continuation is still there because the supreme leader is still in charge.
It's a continuation because that's the way the Iranian system works, ensuring that there are no radical changes. Now, bear in mind that since 1979 there were only two supreme leaders, Khomeini and Khamenei. And Khamenei is 85 years old. So there is thinking about who is going to succeed Khamenei.
And Raisi was one of them. He was tipped to be the successor, wasn't he?
Exactly. And so then the idea that the person that, if we follow this thinking within the Iranian, the Islamic Republic of Iran, is that they looked for someone hardline, not to change when it comes to domestic politics, but also in this sense, the president doesn't have much influence on foreign affairs, but the idea that he was tipped to replace Khamenei as well at one point or another is that continuing also hardline foreign policy.
What kind of country does Raisi leave now? I mean, has been sort of widely tipped domestically, economic turmoil, absolute crackdown on any kind of dissent and freedom of expression. Internationally, however, the fact is that Iran is in one of the most delicate and unstable moments for a long time. And this is a mere month since that drone attack was launched on, drone and missile attack was launched on Israel. To have the death of the president happen at this moment, I mean, what will the repercussions be?
Always this kind of violent death catch any society. It's shocking. It's by surprise. So you start thinking, okay, one, you mourn the leaders, and others, what happens next? And again, someone that was tipped to become the top leader, the supreme leader, then you think, all right, it has impact. The ripple effect in Iran, it goes beyond it. Also talking about the responsibility to have the president and the foreign minister in the same helicopter, considering and another general and a senior clergy in the same helicopter, when the record is not that great. While Iran suffers from economic crisis for decades. It's nothing new. The issue of corruption. And also, the way we don't talk much about the nuclear issue anymore. It sounds almost as a done deal that Iran will get nuclear weapons whenever it decides. As a result, actually, the reckless behavior by Donald Trump withdrawing from the JCPOA. But it's still a major issue, whether not if Iran can develop nuclear weapon, whether it wants to cross this threshold and become a nuclear power. Let alone, as you mentioned, this was quite a brazen reaction to what Israel might have provoked Iran in Syria, but launching 350 drone and ballistic missiles and consolidate actually in the middle, when Israel is isolated internationally, consolidate an alliance to stop Iran. So it creates the default line within the region, Iran versus the rest, when it's the axis of resistance and the other how to stop Iran in case it's challenging stability in the region.
Yossi Meckelberg, thank you so much, as ever, for joining us on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Globalist. It's 14:16 in Taipei, 7:16 a.m. here in London. Now, Taiwan has sworn in its new president, Lai Ching-te, at a ceremony in Taipei.
Now, President Lai Ching-te and Vice President King will accompany former President Taiwan to the main stage.
Among those present, unofficially at least, was a delegation from the United States. During the last few years, Taiwan has refashioned itself as a credible partner for the US, infuriating China in the process. Well, I'm joined now by Samson Ellis, who's Bloomberg's Taipei bureau chief. Very good afternoon to you, Samson.
And good morning to you.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just that little brief clip suggested to those of us who weren't at the ceremony or who didn't follow every moment of it that it seemed to be quite a grandiose and glitzy affair. Is that correct?
It was, and they always are here. There is lots of singing and dancing and performances, flyovers by the military, 21-gun salutes, the singing of the national anthem. And of course, at the center of it all is a speech from the new president where today Lai outlined obviously his plans for the coming 4 years and his presidency and his take on how he plans to handle relationships with China, which is obviously what everybody's looking at.
So what was in President Lai's inaugural speech?
Well, he did seek to assure three main constituencies, basically. Obviously, for the United States, there was a message: I'm not going to cause any trouble. I will adhere to the status quo across the Taiwan Strait, and I look to help further regional peace and, as you say, become a reliable partner for the United States. For China, there was also a message there that that message of not challenging the status quo. He did also mention the constitution of the Republic of China. The Republic of China is, of course, Taiwan's formal name, or the state that is on Taiwan now. And so that is a signal to China that, there isn't going to be a formal declaration of independence from him, but then also for the Taiwanese public, who are obviously increasingly worried about the state of cross-strait relations. Though there was also a message there that, he is going to stand up for Taiwan. He called on China to stop intimidating Taiwan. And then there was this key line that was first uttered by Tsai several years ago, but that the Republic of China and the People's Republic of China are not subordinate to each other. So that's effectively out there his way of outlining that Taiwan is already a de facto independent state.
I mean, looking at the way that he was brought up in a mining town by his mother. I think his father died when he was just 2 in a mining accident, and he says that determination got him to the top of Taiwan's politics. I mean, he is, to all intents and purposes, a fighter. So given that context, is he the right person for Taiwan now?
Well, in many ways, yes. I mean, obviously, he's the person that voters felt is best positioned to represent them and to stand up with them. As you point out, yeah, he did come from a very tough background. You know, I've been to the house where he was born and he grew up, and you know, it's very humble beginnings. And for him to then, you know, come top of his class, get to go to Taiwan's top school, then become a doctor, also get a degree from Harvard, and now become president of Taiwan. You know, it does show the determination of the man, and what really comes across when you meet him and you talk to him and when you hear him speak is he's doing this because he cares. He is, yeah, for want of a better term, an ideologue. He believes passionately that Taiwan should be Taiwan and that the Taiwanese should be in charge of their own affairs. And he's felt strongly about this enough to, you know, throw in his career as a doctor and turn to politics and now get the top job in Taiwan. How things turn out over the next 4 years, obviously, we'll have to see. But as things stand, you know, he was obviously seen by the Taiwanese voters as the best person to represent them.
And his predecessor, Tsai Ing-wen, introduced enormous numbers of changes, didn't she? I mean, she was reshaping Taiwan's international position, defending the island, the sovereignty from China, and he inherits this, internationally speaking. But in terms of the domestic situation that he now inherits, that is more problematic, isn't it?
Well, yeah, things are getting complicated now. I mean, in terms of the economy, things are fine. Like Taiwan's economy is actually growing quite strongly. You know, there's such global demand for chips and the semiconductors that Taiwan makes now with this new surge of, you know, AI technology that, you know, the next couple of years in terms of the economy look at like they're going to be fairly straightforward. The big challenge to him will come from the legislature, so Taiwan's parliament, where his party, the Democratic Progressive Party, did not win a majority there. So now it's controlled by the opposition, predominantly the Kuomintang, which was established in China and, you know, whose goal is eventual unification with China. So it's therefore much more open to China to talk with them, accepts that the notion that Taiwan is a part of China and that can therefore, you know, Beijing is willing to talk to them. They're now in charge of the legislature, and they're trying to push through a bill that would massively increase the powers of the legislature. You know, that would allow them to call Lai to have to report to them whenever they request. It would increase their powers of investigation. It would force the executive branch of the government to have to give them more documents than it currently does. And so it really is seen as a big challenge to Tsai and an attempt to make his life and his ability to govern Taiwan much, much more difficult.
Samson Ellis, thank you so much for joining us on the programme. Still to come? The wonderful, if warm, world of sauna diplomacy. Stay with us on The Globalist.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
Let's continue now with today's newspapers on The Globalist. Joining me in the studio is Chuck Hacker, Senior Partner at Control Risks. Currently not there, though, on leave, writing a book on Russian and international business. Good morning.
Good morning.
Do I call you Chuck or Charles? I've only been interviewing you for about 5 years, and we've never quite got this.
Well, we tend to stick to Charles because it sounds a little bit fancier, and so I'm trying to be impressive here in the studios of Monocle Radio, and I think... Charles, maybe if we do the weekend shows, we can do Chuck.
Okay, Monday to Friday, he's Charles. Let's, Charles, look at today's papers. It's good to see you because you've been across the New York Times' take on the death of Ebrahim Raisi, haven't you? It started to roll from about 18 hours ago now, and everybody was thinking, well, helicopter crashes usually has one ending to it, but we need to dance around it. But the obituaries and the assessments were absolutely ready and poised to go, weren't they?
That's absolutely right. And so, one of the issues with the print papers is that, of course, the news is in all of the papers, but the outcome of the crash and the disposition of the president and the foreign minister were uncertain as the papers went to press overnight. I think one of the things that's impressive about the coverage that we did see in the papers as far as it went overnight was the restraint, because when you have an aviation disaster like this in a country that is in one of the most volatile parts of the world, the temptation to speculate as to causes and to outcomes is fairly high. The temptation is almost irresistible. And most newspapers resisted jumping to any conclusions about the origins of the crash, let alone its outcome. But now we do have, at least in the online versions of the papers, quite an awful lot of coverage, and some of it sort of rolling Twitter-style coverage. But the New York Times, just as Andrew and as Yossi mentioned earlier in the broadcast, the New York Times looks very deeply at domestic and international considerations and leaves open an awful lot of questions about succession and about stability in Iran domestically, and points towards, as Yossi mentioned, the problems of corruption in Iran, the impact of sanctions on the economy, the fact that actually climate change has its own impact on Iran in the form of water shortages. The Iranian currency is at a record low. And of course, earlier this year, there were domestic terrorist attacks in Iran that destabilized the situation there even more.
The New York Times says that the death of Mr. Raisi, a conservative who was seen as a successor to the supreme leader, comes during a particularly tumultuous period for Iran. I wonder whether it would be safe to say that in the years that we've been covering this road, tumultuous just seems to be the sort of de facto status for Iran. I mean, Raisi's departure, how's that being viewed?
Well, that's right. It's tumultuous for the entire region. And so among the governments around the world that will be examining the transition very closely, we'll have a caretaker government for 50 days, and then there'll be fresh elections. Saudi Arabia will be watching this very, very carefully. The United States, of course, will be looking at this very carefully. Israel will have all eyes on succession and the outcome of elections in Iran. And you're right. Whatever the outcome of the elections in Iran, the region will stay unstable. As we cover this road, we will continue to cover this road for months and years to come, no matter what the outcome is.
Okay, let's move on to other stories that are dominating the headlines today. Let's look at the Financial Times. G7 warms to plans for Trump-proofing Ukraine aid. That's complicated.
It's a little bit complicated, but it is also in just about every single paper this morning. But we're going to stick with the FT for the time being. And this story fits very neatly into an increasing trend of newspaper articles talking about trying to get ahead of the potential Trump victory in November presidential elections in the United States, and how countries and governments around the world are trying to sort of insure themselves, if you will, against this. And what the FT says is this has now turned to the topic of aid to Ukraine. And, just a few weeks ago, the United States released $60 billion worth of aid to Ukraine. President Trump will have the ability to undo some of that should he win in November. And so the G7 will be meeting shortly to discuss how to convert this aid into a loan, deliver this loan immediately and upfront, and then take Russian central bank assets and the interest that they generate to back the loan.
This is the sort of sideways approach that everybody is trying to take, given the fact that Trump is leading in the polls at the moment in the United States. What's interesting in the FT is the comments from the Italians, which is currently holding the G7 presidency, isn't it? And they're saying the summit will seek to, there's a summit coming up this week to reach consensus on how to maximise the use of windfall profits. I mean, Italy has not always been so anti-Russia, has it? It's got quite a complicated relationship, but there seems to be this consensus now by the West to A, shore up against Russia, but also to B, shore up against Trump.
Yeah, two kind of important trends coming out of this. And the first one, you're absolutely right, that this is interesting news specifically from Italy and is one of the things that Giorgia Meloni has sort of surprised her colleagues with and surprised the European Union with. It was expected that her right-wing government would be a little bit more sympathetic towards Russia and that she would become a very difficult prime minister in Italy. And in fact, the exact opposite has become the case. The other thing is that this tends to consolidate consensus around what to do with all of the Russian money that is parked in European central banks. There was a movement not too long ago to take all of that money, to try to take all of that money and ship it directly to Russia, although that would set a very, very dangerous precedent about what to do with central bank money. So instead, there is now some sort of consensus coalescing around using the interest that those central bank assets throw off and putting them towards use in Ukraine.
Let's stay with an Italian theme for our final story, but not necessarily geopolitics. Well, the politics of the streets and the politics of dining, the tradition that many of us living in cold and dreary climates crave, the opportunity to eat outdoors, is something that many of us consider to be totally inherent to the Italian experience, perhaps not so no longer, I should say, by the Italians.
Well, that's right. So first of all, congratulations to the headline writers of The Times who've managed to squeeze 2 Italian words into their headline. They say al fresco fiasco, as many Italians turn against a tradition. And so this is a surprisingly complicated story, Emma, because the very country that gave us the expression for dining outdoors is turning against it. And this has literally sent Italy into an uproar. And it's done this on a few fronts. First of all, basically the federal government in Italy is taking the sort of outdoor dining relaxation of regulations that came during the pandemic, and they're making them permanent. But they're doing it on the federal level. And so first you have cities in an uproar saying, leave us to make our own decisions. How dare you do this? And you're stomping on our, urban sovereignty. Number one. Number two, I learned a very interesting piece here, and this is that Italians themselves don't say al fresco. When they... Can you imagine? When they dine outdoors, they say they're dining, and I cannot put on a French accent this early in the morning. You'll have to help me with this. But they say that they're dining dehors, which is the French for outdoors. And so when Italians eat outside, they don't eat outside in Italian. They eat outside in French. The problem is that all of those sort of sidewalk extensions that emerged sort of like mushrooms after rain during the pandemic, they've become quite unsightly. And I can tell you this, having just returned from New York City, where we had the exact same problem. They're awful. They're just, the sidewalks are polluted now with sort of plastic encampments. And the
plastic
encampments where people are sort of still dining outdoors. And Milan is in a particular uproar over this. There's a neighborhood called Naviglie in Milan that has become hugely popular for nightlife, and they just want to shut the whole thing down.
Do you know what fiasco means?
Fiasco, I assume, means...
It's a mess, right?
It's a mess.
But it's not actually a mess. It's actually the shape of the Tuscan wine bottle. And it dates back to when Venetian glass blowers would make a mess of a bottle that they were doing, and it had a round bottom. And it was a fiasco, so it then became an ordinary bottle. So there we go. We've all learned something today.
Living linguistics lessons.
Charles, I think, anyway, if there's a proper person who knows what they're talking about, do let me know. Charles Hecker, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. You're listening to The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. The time here in London is 7:33. Let's have a look at some of today's other news headlines. The UN's humanitarian chief has warned of apocalyptic consequences due to aid shortages in Gaza. Martin Griffiths said that if fuel runs out and aid doesn't reach civilians, a famine, which is looming, will be present. He added that routes into Gaza have been blocked by battles near to the Rafah and Kerem Shalom crossings. Slovakia's Interior Minister has suggested that the man suspected of trying to murder the Prime Minister, Robert Fico, may not have been working alone. Mr. Fico's life is no longer in danger, but he is still in intensive care after the shooting on Wednesday. A man's been charged with his attempted murder, but in a press conference, Matas Estok said an investigation team's exploring whether the suspect was operating in a group of people. And 2 people have died after a small boat collided with a cruise ship on the Danube River north of Budapest. Disaster response units, including 95 personnel and 25 vessels and drones, were still searching for several missing people along the entire Hungarian section of the river. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now, the issue of what to call the country that lies directly northwest of Greece and directly east of Albania was, in theory, decided in 2019. Because after decades of dispute with Athens, North Macedonia took its name. Well, the country's new president has thrown things into disarray. At her inauguration ceremony earlier this month, she pledged to exercise the office of President of Macedonia conscientiously and responsibly. It has not gone down well with the Greeks. So to tell us more, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Evdoxia Limperi, who's a UK correspondent for ERT Hellenic Broadcasting Corporation. Good morning, Evdoxia.
Good morning, Emma.
So why do we believe that the president of North Macedonia referred to her country as Macedonia?
It's not that difficult if you know what she stands for, what her party stands for, and given that recently on the 5th of May they had their elections there and they were elected by the majority of the votes. It's a nationalistic populist party, and this pledge was in their agenda, the pre-election agenda. So it's more like for the satisfaction of their voters, because this is something they promised anyway. Because there is a PRESP agreement, it's their constitutional name is North Macedonia. Given all the different sides now, Greece, EU, NATO, North Macedonia is a NATO country. I think they cannot go much further than that, actually.
How have the Greeks actually reacted to this? Because at the time that she said Macedonia, not North Macedonia, the Greek ambassador left the room.
Yes, but that's all that happened. I mean, since then, the act has provoked international reactions, not only the Greek reactions, and pressure to respect the PRESP agreement. Firstly, by the other partner of the agreement, Greece, of course. The PM, Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis, gave a statement underlining that the provocative choice of the new president of North Macedonia, as he wrote, to violate the official text of her oath and call her country by a different name is an illegal and unacceptable initiative. So, Mr. Mitsotakis repeats the consequences of not keeping their part of the agreement in every interview he gives daily, as all the parties are running the 9th June EU elections campaign at the moment in Greece, as in other EU countries, of course. So every day he repeats the consequences, and that would be for Greece to block the EU accession for North Macedonia.
And this is something that's a big concern for the EU, isn't it?
Absolutely. That's why they reacted as well. The EU Commission President, the Vice President, who is Greek, apparently Mr. Skinas, also USA and NATO, as I said. So it's not only Greece, but Greece, interestingly, if you see, hasn't done, other than the Greek PM first statement and everyday statements, he interestingly hasn't done any diplomatic steps, such as, for example, summoning the ambassador or something, because he knows he has the whole West with him. The EU president, as I said, has made comments. The vice president warned North Macedonia, and the same did NATO and the USA. No one, not one side, wants any turbulence in the Balkans at the moment that would threat the newly drawn map, right? We all remember the catastrophic Balkan wars in the 90s. So especially when Ukraine at the moment is in war with Russia. It's in our neighborhood, so no one wants anything else than that. And interestingly, Emma, inside the country, the new president's report may have satisfied many citizens, but soon everyone will come face to face with reality and realize the negative consequences that the confusion over the name will have for the future. Moreover, the economic, the social life of many inhabitants in North Macedonia. North Macedonia, to give you an idea, is inextricably linked to Thessaloniki, which is the second biggest city of Greece. It's my home city as well, and it lies in the north of Greece, near the borders with North Macedonia. So the links are, I mean, Greeks go all the time to North Macedonia. North Macedonians come down to Halkidiki for the holidays, or they come for shopping, or there's a lot of trade action between the two countries, and it is also telling that in opinion polls, the citizens of North Macedonia name Greece as the only one of their neighbours that they do not see as a threat.
Evdoxia Limperi, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Globalist. Now let's rewind a little. Remember Ace of Base, one of the best-selling bands in the 1990s, is back with a new no-holds-barred documentary for Viaplay, a leading streaming service in the Nordics. Monocle's Fernanda Augusta Pacheco spoke from Jenny Berggren and Ulf Ekberg from Swedish group Ace of Base. Fernanda met them in Copenhagen to talk about their legacy and how the process of making the documentary was rather emotional.
It is very personal when you have this personal film material. And of course, all the new material with Jenny and me is very important to add on it, that we can also describe and explain the story in our words with perspective on what happened in the past. It's easier now when you have a few years afterwards, when you have a little more bird perspective on the career, to talk about it, maybe in different words, than when we were actually inside this crazy circus, because it was just very crazy, totally crazy, mayhem all the time.
I mean, it was clear watching the documentary, and I think I mentioned before the interview, it's incredible how personal it was. It talked about difficult moments from the band, but in a way, I think for those who are fans of Ace of Base, it's quite interesting as well, because a lot of documentaries are very sanitized and almost boring. I mean, you don't get to know the artist in a way, but that's very different in this documentary, right, Jenny?
It was one of my main goals to be personal and have a very thin skin towards the people who see it. Why? The reason is that we were talking about the tough moments in our lives, and the legacy of those should be how we fixed it. How we were broken by something, whatever it was, but we also got whole again. And how we managed to have lives today that are normal, working, affectionate, up is up, down is down. It was not that way when we were in Ace of Base, but now it is. And it takes, you have to take it back. And we did that step by step, and we became whole again step by step. And I even wrote a book about it, how I was going from being half disastered from a fan that broke in, and for me, it was very important to embrace the fans after that, because I knew the fans. They were great personalities, and I'd grown to know them even more. They write their own books about their own experiences since I wrote mine. It's an amazing fan base out there, and it is very important that they were still loved, that they knew that I wouldn't take them away, because that was one night that was really, really horrible for me. So we became whole again in many ways. That was the reason I wanted it to be personal. That is the reason I wanted to be skin thin. So you can feel our pain and you can feel our sorrows, but you can also feel our joy of being the ones who we are today. And that is important. That's a good story to tell. Always a good story to tell.
And what a crazy story as well. There was one moment when you guys cracked down the US, which at the time was very kind of gangster rap or grunge, and suddenly Ace of Base was everywhere. I mean, must be crazy, because I remember the time in the 90s. You guys were quite unique in the sound, right? Is that the secret of the success, perhaps? And the melodies, of course.
The secret, I think, is because we did music that we wanted to hear ourselves and nobody else did. We were inspired by a few bands like Kraftwerk and Depeche Mode, and at the current band like KLF and Tektronic. But we tried to do what we liked, which ended up to be a massive scale of different genres, which made it quite difficult for record companies to really promote us. What are Ace of Base? What is Ace of Base? Techno, electronic, synth, reggae, or pop, what actually are we? It was very difficult in the 90s to do that promotion. So, and that was a great thing to come to Denmark, because nobody got it in Sweden. We tried for years after year after year, and nobody believed in that in Sweden. And suddenly we had this little small record company in Denmark with this crazy record boss, Kjell Vennik, and he was just, I just understand it. I get everything, all of it. I love you guys. So that was amazing. And when we got to US and we reached the charts in the US, and before we even assigned there, so with All That She Wants, we got on the charts just on import. We ended up on the grunge list together with Nirvana, because they didn't know where to place us, on what list do we fit. We were not really pop, we were not really house or techno, so we ended up on the grunge list, which was quite amazing. Us and Nirvana, which was fun.
You were ahead of time.
Yeah, it was very ahead of time.
Music,
so now,
mixes.
And now it's more natural what pop is, but because we were so early with what we were doing, it was very hard for people to place us. But that was obviously our strength, that suddenly we did something new.
And Jenny, what do you think about the reaction of your own country? Did it change with time, now with the documentary? I mean, how do you feel? Because I know in the beginning it was a bit difficult to crack Sweden. You mentioned Denmark and other countries in Europe. But how do you think Sweden perceives Ace of Base these days?
Well, we experienced a fantastic moment yesterday. We were presenting an award in the Swedish Grammy, and we just went out on stage and the applause were immense. It was fantastic. And then we started to talk and there were interruption with applause. And that was just so great, because that's the grey area of Stockholm, the smog of everybody's being a bit jealous, looking at each other. And we was just soaring above it and wished, I think we said that, like, we wish you who wins now the same success that we had, because we have fans all over the world that has memories to these songs. We were presenting the award of the Song of the Year, and that was a big thing to see that the establishment of the whole Swedish pop scene, who really hated us, or music scene, went just back to us and said, okay, some applause for you guys. That was great.
About time, right?
Yeah, but it's so stupid. I mean, it's so stupid. But I know how the Swedish mind works. I'm a Swede myself. I know exactly. It's like, I'm not supposed to.
That was Fernanda Augusto Pacheco hearing from Jenny Berggren and Julf Ekberg from Ace of Base. And you can watch the documentary at Viaplay. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
Time now to have a quick look at business with Vicky Price, economist and former joint head of the UK government's economic service. Good morning, Vicky.
Good morning.
I think let's focus on inflation. It's stable now, and there's been an enormous drop in the last year, hasn't there?
No, absolutely. I mean, we had those figures out a little while ago, but now they've been confirmed that the euro area is seeing inflation of about 2.4%. I mean, that compares with 7% a year ago, and it was a lot more than that earlier. So what we've seen is energy prices, of course, coming down. And if you look at the details, You see that the energy component still is negative right now, which is good news. But of course, it does show the importance of what has been happening over the last couple of years in terms of pushing inflation up out of control, if you like, of the central banks, and hence why, of course, we had interest rates come up, which haven't necessarily done the reduction in inflation themselves, but what they have done, of course, is they have slowed the economy down. And the issue now is what happens given that those interest rates are still so high in real terms, whether they will be coming down in the EU a lot faster perhaps than had been anticipated earlier.
I mean, an interest rate cut is expected, isn't it, in the Eurozone?
Absolutely. So we're talking about June. There could be a cut a little bit later, but of course we have already heard some concerns that perhaps there shouldn't be a back-to-back cut, so another cut in August, but perhaps they'll wait a little bit. But the expectation now is that June will be the month when both the EU and the UK cut interest rates. Of course, we still have the issue that we're talking about a large region. Of course, the Eurozone is really what I meant rather than the EU. The European Central Bank, which, of course, is in charge of interest rates in the Eurozone, will cut those rates. There is quite a big divergence in inflation rates across the Eurozone, and we need to bear that in mind. Some countries still have inflation of perhaps 4% or 5%. I mean, that includes, places like Belgium, which seems to be on the high side. But then you've got, interestingly enough, some countries quite close to Russia, which had huge inflation just over a year ago, for over 20%, now seeing inflation of just, 0.4 in Lithuania, 1.1% in Latvia. So it's really, really come down quite significantly. So it is a difficult path for the European Central Bank in terms of, where to put rates. But there is no doubt that where they are now, they are causing quite a lot of pain to companies and to individuals.
Tell us a little bit more about the European Union and its relationship with Russia. I mean, we've talked about how the Russian invasion of Ukraine was one of the great precipitating factors of a rise in inflation. And the fact is that everybody has been told to close its doors to Russia. This isn't the case, though, completely, is it? There's an article in the FT which talks about the banks who are still doing business in Russia.
Absolutely, and they do, and it's quite difficult for them to exit because, of course, if they do that, as we've seen already with some measures that Russia has taken, they sort of lose quite a lot of their assets that they have there. So they've been doing it gradually, but they're still there. Some of them actually making quite a lot of profit still in Russia. The European Union the European Commission certainly is pushing banks to withdraw as much as they can. But there has been an interesting case recently. I mean, of course, we're talking about freezing, and there has been the freezing of Russian assets in the West and the use perhaps of some of the profits made out of keeping those assets to facilitate the rebuilding of Ukraine, which is contentious as far as Russia is concerned. But right now, of course, there is a case going on because various contracts that were signed at the time, before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which have sort of stopped, are leading to particularly one court in St. Petersburg seizing assets or saying it will be seizing assets from a number of banks that have been involved in helping to finance and guarantee some of the activities in Russia. So there's one particular case, which is a subsidiary of Gazprom, which is called Roskam Alliance, which had been intending to be involved in a construction of the sort of pipeline using a company called Linda, which then withdrew with a lot of originally backing from various banks, whether it's UniCredit of the Italian bank or Commerzbank or Deutsche Bank. They had put guarantees in there, and then of course this work was suspended because of the sanctions against Russia. Then of course the Russian company was suing those banks to get the money back that they had guaranteed since the construction didn't happen. And now of course the court has seized about 700 million worth of euros of those banks. So there is a bit of tit for tat, if you like, up to a point. But also it just shows how difficult it is to operate for banks with those sanctions all around it, and the costs really of withdrawing from Russia, which are going to be quite significant for many.
Vicky Price, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Globalist, and delegates to the UK's first ever sauna conference arrived today at the Sauna Summit 2024 in London. Speakers from Finland, Estonia, Norway, Denmark, including of this parish, formerly Marcus Hippie, are going to give tips on best practice. We have just a few moments to find out what these tips are from Emma O'Kelly, Ambassador for from the British Sauna Society, and Mark Lamb, co-organiser of the summit, which kicks off in just an hour. Emma, may I ask the absolutely most cliched question? Are things warming up where you are?
Oh, they certainly are. Hi, yes. I'm sitting on a rooftop in Hackney in the sunshine, and right next to me, Sarah Dance is trying to put up a tent sauna for the event. And there are 4 saunas on the roof, which are obviously not lit yet because the sauna party begins at the end of the day of conferences and speakers from all those countries you mentioned, as well as kind of 100 UK sauna operators who are all coming into London.
And Mark, you're organising all this. I mean, how do you persuade people that coming to participate in the sauna summit is a worthwhile thing on a warm summer's day?
Well, it's actually rather the other way around. We're limited in our capacity here to about 170 people, and the tickets have sold out very quickly, and we've got over 120 people on the wait list. So it really demonstrates that this is probably overdue. This is the first time the UK sauna industry has come together, and as your listeners will probably know, there are many sauna operators popping up on beaches, lakes, rivers, and all over the UK and Ireland. And many of them are coming today. And sadly, we couldn't accommodate all of those who wanted to come. So next year, it'll be a bigger event. But this is the first time we've done it. So we're really excited.
Emma, what is it that happens in a sauna that promotes diplomacy?
Well, I think many of these countries, the Baltics and the Finns, share a border with quite a feisty superpower, and they have used the sauna throughout history to do deals with difficult people and to have negotiations. And I think it's the idea that you're all semi-naked, vulnerable. You can't hide weapons up your sleeves when you have no sleeves, as the Finns say, and everybody's guards are down. And they really, truly believe that the sauna is a great place to negotiate, to work out difficult deals. Maybe a few saunas over time, not necessarily the first sauna, but they all swear by it. And in Estonia, they even built special sauna ante-rooms where you could go and sit between your sweat sessions and talk with Soviet officials to negotiate things.
Indeed, I think that they actually deploy saunas down to the front line to help Ukrainian troops. Mark, one of the focuses, as we mentioned this today, is to give tips on best practice. What is sauna best practice? And in 10 seconds, what shouldn't you do?
Well, you should listen to your body, and you should not stay too long. There's no competition in the sauna. It's quite the opposite. So I think really just people, as they come into this, and a lot of people are joining the sauna for the first time in the UK, and really, we would say, listen to your body. Don't overdo it. Drink plenty of water. But you're going to feel great afterwards, especially when you accompany that with a cold plunge, which is the right way to do it, in our opinion.
And Emma, same question to you in 20 seconds. What should you and should you not do in a sauna for best practice and indeed worst practice?
Well, they always say in the sauna bathing countries, no arguments and politics in the sauna. So anything you need to resolve, do it outside. Everybody sits on towels. Hygiene is a very big part of it because it is a cleansing ritual as well. So you sit on towels, you rinse between rounds, you leave the sauna clean. All these things are kind of essential ingredients. And I think you can talk, you can not talk, you can behave how you want. There are sort of rules around etiquette that vary from culture to culture, but basically it's going in there for as long as you feel comfortable and sort of doing what you want respectfully, minding the space and those around you, I would say.
Rinse between rounds, very important. Emma O'Kelly and Mark Lamb, thank you so much. Wishing you the best for your sauna festival. That's all the time we have for today's programme, however. The warmest of thanks, no pun intended, to all my guests and to the producers, Chris Chermak, Carlotta Rebello and Tom Webb. Our researcher was George Ruskin and our studio manager, Mariella Bevan. After the headlines, there's more music on the way. The briefing's live at midday in London with Chris Chermak, and The Globalist is back tomorrow. For now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening. Have a great week.